With May the 4th in our collective rearview mirrors and Solo, a Star Wars story right around the corner, it's time to dig into one of my favorite fan theories in the entirety of Star Wars fandom. It's called the Bigger Luke theory, and it makes things like Jar Jar Binks being a secret Sith Lord or Snoke being Anakin Skywalker's secret clone seem canonical by comparison. It first made the rounds in late 2015, but I only discovered it recently, and safe to say, it's ruined my f***ing life. The crux of the Bigger Luke theory is as follows. Luke Skywalker's height throughout the original trilogy is inconsistent, and the only explanation is that there's another bigger Luke Skywalker out there just hanging around somewhere. So strap on your tinfoil hats, my friends, because it only gets weirder from here. And that's exactly what we're gonna get into on today's episode of The Dan Cave. When you first head to the Bigger Luke Theory's website, it instructs you that you've just taken your first step into a slightly larger world. This theory allegedly began in 1985 after a group of Star Wars fans watching A New Hope on VHS began noticing inconsistencies in Luke Skywalker's height. In some scenes, he appeared to be slightly larger than he did in others. But why? The Bigger Luke theory employs very specific criteria in how it assesses whether Luke is truly bigger in any given scene. Usually, Bigger Luke theorists judge Luke's height relative to Han Solo, and frames without Han in them are frowned upon, given the designation of NHPs, or no Han pics. There are two main branches of the theory, the canon Luke hypothesis and the Hamill hypothesis. Now, according to the canon Luke hypothesis, there are at least two Luke Skywalkers in the Star Wars universe. Regular-sized Luke, aka Luke Prime, and a slightly larger version known as Bigger Luke. That is only slightly dumber than the fact that Luke Skywalker's clones in the expanded universe were known as Luke with 2 U's and Luke with 3 U's. That's real, and real dumb. The Hamill hypothesis breaks down the fourth wall by reasoning that there was an uncredited stand-in for Mark Hamill that was used for certain scenes in the original trilogy, and that's how they explain a bigger Luke. But why does nobody know his identity? Well, it's not a story the Jedi would tell you. There's also a third theory that combined the first two, and it mostly bears mentioning because it's abbreviated to HamCan, and that's just silly. But here's the kicker. How much bigger is the Luke in question? Well, it's generally agreed upon that Bigger Luke is, wait for it, roughly 2 to 3 centimeters or 1 inch taller than regular Luke. Holy okay. Some people allege that Bigger Luke is only 1 centimeter bigger. Others claim he's 4 to 5 centimeters bigger. Why won't the government reveal the truth? Before we write off these Luke truthers as complete dinguses, let's take a look at the evidence. Now, most of the evidence, as I mentioned before, are shots of Luke standing next to Han where he appears to be slightly taller, but maybe he's just like crouching or has like a scoliosis day. I don't know how that works. Spine stuff. Could this just be a trick of the eyes played by camera angles? No, it could not. There's a bigger Luke. Let's look at the facts. Let's Luke at the facts. In fact, the very act of looking for a bigger Luke is known as luking. I love that. So, Mark Hamill is 5'7", according to the presumably trustworthy celebheights.com, which uses a widely cited 1977 fact file quoting Hamill himself. However, if you pop a goog for Mark Hamill's height, Google claims that the actor is 5'9". What? Now, I don't know about you, but that's a bigger Luke if I've ever seen one. 2 inches, to be precise. Adding further fuel to this fire, well, I don't know, how about Obi-Wan Kenobi's cleverly veiled line after he blocks the training remote shots?
You've taken your first step into a larger world.
Notice the emphasis on a larger? Yeah, that's what I thought. He's talking about Luke. And what about the inclusion of a character named Biggs Darklighter? Forecasting much, George Lucas? If you didn't want us to know the truth, why not call him Normal Sizathan Darklighter, you idiot? And who could forget Princess Leia's immortal question to Luke?
Too short for a stormtrooper?
Huh? You know who wouldn't be too short for a stormtrooper? A larger Luke, whose existence Leia could be alluding to. And, of course, my favorite piece of evidence, Lando Calrissian's confused look when he sees Luke for the first time in Cloud City in The Empire Strikes Back. And I quote from the Bigger Luke website, During the scene, Lando Calrissian lays his eyes on our hero for the very first time and quickly loses interest. However, towards the end of the scene, Lando appears to stare at Luke with a very perplexed expression. Being the proficient card player and gambler that he is, one would assume that Lando Calrissian had a very keen eye, perhaps the best eyes in the galaxy. It is therefore distinctly possible that Lando did in fact perceive a height change in Luke between two different viewings. End quote. Wow. You know, that old chestnut. That what the f did I just read, chestnut? So is there actually a bigger Luke out there? Well, of course, but that point of view is probably just a wacky camera angle. But then again, hey, it's fun to overthink things, right? But tell me, what do you think of the bigger Luke theory? What's your favorite ridiculous Star Wars fan theory? Let me know in the comments below and give me a slightly bigger thumbs up while you're there. Now be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell or else you might miss next week's episode about a World War II hero who was frozen solid in a block of ice and defrosted 60 years later to prevent a group of high schoolers from getting laid before senior prom and ruining a perfectly good pastry in Captain American Pie. Until next time, keep on digging. Let's open up the old mailbag, shall we? At Tron0905 asks, what's your favorite comic crossover to read? That's an awesome question. While I'm sure there's been better written ones out there, my favorite remains 1996's DC vs. Marvel Comics. It's a 4-issue miniseries that saw each publisher's biggest characters slugging it out in increasingly ridiculous fashion. And readers were actually able to vote on the outcomes of some of the biggest battles, things like Superman vs. the Hulk and Storm vs. Wonder Woman, but the best and weirdest part was when they created something called the Amalgam Universe, in which Marvel and DC characters were mashed together to make these new characters, like Darkclaw, a combo of Batman and Wolverine, or Super Soldier, a combo of Captain America and Superman. It wasn't the best series ever, it's probably pretty bad in hindsight, but it has a special place in my heart. But tell me, what's your favorite comic crossover to read? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time!